Welcome back to Godless and Grounded. There's a certain kind of conversation that happens when religion gets backed into a corner. You point out an obvious flaw, a contradiction, or something that just doesn't add up, and instead of facing the issue head-on, the other person pulls out the excuse. Not a thoughtful answer, not an evidence-based argument, but something that sounds like it came from a late-night brainstorming session where logic left the room hours ago. The interesting part is that these excuses are repeated so often, across so many different religions that you could almost create a bingo card for them. And today, we're going to talk about the absolute dumbest of them. The kind of excuses that, when you hear them, you have to pause for a second and ask yourself, wait, did they actually just say that? One of the most common ones is, you just have to have faith. This is the classic way of shutting down any logical discussion. It's essentially saying, we don't have evidence and we know it, but we'd like you to believe it anyway. Imagine applying this to anything else in life. If a doctor told you, I don't have test results, I haven't examined you, but you just have to have faith that you have this disease and need this expensive treatment, you'd run out of the office. Or if a car dealer said, this engine will last forever, just have faith, you'd probably laugh in their face. But somehow, when it's religion, people treat faith as if it's a virtue instead of an admission that the evidence is missing. Another common one is, God works in mysterious ways. This one is a catch-all excuse for when something bad happens that shouldn't have, or when something makes no sense in the context of an all-knowing, all-powerful being. A child dies in an accident? Mysterious ways. Natural disaster wipes out a city? Mysterious ways. But think about it. This is basically saying, we don't understand, and we're not going to try to. It's the intellectual equivalent of putting your hands over your ears and humming loudly so you don't have to face the uncomfortable reality that bad things happen for no divine reason at all. If you replace God with any other character, the absurdity becomes obvious. Imagine saying, the CEO works in mysterious ways after a company collapse, and expecting shareholders to nod in agreement instead of demanding answers. Then there's the all-time favorite, you can't understand God's plan. This one's like the cousin of mysterious ways, but with an extra layer of arrogance, as if not understanding something is proof that it's true. In reality, not understanding something is just not understanding something. If your mechanic couldn't explain why your brakes failed but told you it's all part of their plan, you wouldn't accept that. You'd find another mechanic. The truth is, when someone says, you can't understand God's plan, what they're really saying is, this doesn't make sense to me either, but I'm going to pretend that's a good thing. Let's not forget, God is testing you. This excuse is pulled out whenever life throws disaster, suffering, or tragedy at someone. Your business fails? God's testing you. You get sick? God's testing you. But if this were actually true, then God would be the most manipulative being imaginable, deliberately hurting people just to see if they still believe. It's like if a parent set fire to their child's toys to test whether they still loved them. We'd call that abusive. Yet in religion, this is portrayed as noble. The problem with this logic is that it's impossible to disprove. No matter what happens, good or bad, it's all part of the test. That's not reasoning. That's a mental loop you can't escape. One particularly lazy excuse is, it's not for us to question. This one is basically saying curiosity is a sin. It tries to shut down thought before it even begins. But here's the problem. Questioning is how humans have solved every major problem in history. If people had said, it's not for us to question disease, we'd still be dying from smallpox. If we'd said, it's not for us to question the shape of the earth, we'd still believe it was flat. The moment you stop questioning, you stop learning. So when religion tells you not to question, it's not protecting you from something dangerous. It's protecting itself from being exposed. Another strange one is, the devil is deceiving you. This is the perfect get-out-of-jail-free card for any argument. If you present evidence against a belief, they don't have to deal with the evidence. They can just claim it came from the devil. It's the religious version of fake news. You can't reason with it because any counterpoint is already labeled as evil. Imagine if a politician could dismiss any criticism by saying, that's just my enemy deceiving you. It's a tactic to make sure no outside information can penetrate the bubble of belief. Then there's, without God, there's no morality. This one might sound deep, but it collapses instantly under scrutiny. If morality only comes from God, then people wouldn't know right from wrong without divine instruction. But we can see that's not true. Countless non-religious people live moral, compassionate lives. In fact, moral systems existed before many modern religions, and plenty of moral values, like equality or human rights, actually conflict with what's written in ancient scriptures. If morality was really dependent on God, then we'd expect religious people to always behave better than non-religious people. But history and daily news headlines show that morality is far more about human empathy and reason than divine rules. We can't skip. Science can't explain everything. This is often used to suggest that if science doesn't have an answer yet, religion must be correct by default. But that's not how reasoning works. Science is about admitting what we don't know and then working to find out. Religion often takes what we don't know and declares, well, our book says it's this, so that's that. If we applied the same logic elsewhere, we'd never have any progress. If people had said, lightning can't be explained, so it must be Zeus, we'd have stopped there. The fact that science doesn't have all the answers doesn't mean religion automatically does. It just means there's more to learn. Another excuse that pops up constantly is, billions of people believe, so it must be true. This is the appeal to popularity, and it's as weak as it sounds. Billions of people once believed the Earth was the center of the universe. They were wrong. Billions of people believed diseases were caused by bad air. Wrong again. Truth isn't decided by a vote. It's decided by evidence. The fact that a lot of people believe something only proves that ideas can spread, not that they're correct. We also hear, look at how beautiful the world is. That proves God exists. This one ignores the fact that beauty is subjective and that nature isn't only sunsets and flowers, it's also earthquakes, viruses, and parasites that burrow into children's eyes. If beauty proves God, then what does ugliness prove? If a beautiful mountain means a loving creator, then shouldn't a deadly tsunami mean the opposite? The truth is, beauty is a human perception, not proof of divine authorship. One of the most bizarre excuses is, if you don't believe, you'll go to hell, so you should believe just in case. This is called Pascal's wager, and it's basically saying, even if it's not true, you should fake believe to avoid eternal punishment. But this falls apart immediately, because which God should you believe in? If you choose the wrong one, you might offend the real one, assuming there is one, and end up in hell anyway. Plus, genuine belief isn't something you can just switch on like a light. You can't choose to believe something you think is false just because it's convenient. Then we have, everything happens for a reason. On the surface, this sounds comforting, but it's another way of saying that random events are part of a cosmic plan. In reality, a lot of things happen because of chance, human decisions, or natural processes, not because a supernatural being arranged them. If everything really happened for a reason, then every tragedy would be deliberate. That's a disturbing idea, not a comforting one. And of course, there's, you can't prove God doesn't exist. This is technically true. You can't disprove every possible version of God. But that's not how burden of proof works. You also can't prove invisible unicorns aren't circling the moon right now, but no one believes in them without evidence. The burden of proof is always on the person making the claim, not the one questioning it. If someone told you they could turn invisible but refused to demonstrate it, you wouldn't just take their word for it. I've also heard, miracles happen all the time. That proves God. But most so-called miracles turn out to have natural explanations, misunderstandings, or are exaggerated stories passed along until they grow more fantastic. And when actual, verifiable miracles are demanded, the kind that can be tested and proven, they vanish. Funny how the miracles always happen in ways that can't be recorded or reproduced, but never in front of a panel of scientists with cameras rolling. These excuses, when you step back and look at them, are all designed for one purpose: to avoid the hard questions. They don't bring clarity, they don't bring evidence, and they don't bring truth. They just protect the belief from being examined. And the reason they keep working is because they're simple, emotionally appealing, and repeated over and over until they feel familiar. Another gem that always pops up is, God healed me. This usually comes from someone who was sick, prayed, and then got better. But here's the thing. People who don't pray also recover from illnesses, and people who pray sometimes don't. If God healed you, what about the child in the hospital whose parents prayed just as hard but who didn't survive? Either God is playing favorites, or recovery is based on medicine, the body's natural healing, and luck, not divine intervention. If prayer really worked the way people claim, hospitals would have prayer wings instead of ICUs, and the survival rates for believers would be dramatically higher than for non-believers. Spoiler, they aren't. Then there's, God saved me from that accident. You'll often hear this after someone narrowly avoids harm. I was almost in a crash, but God protected me. It sounds nice until you think about all the people who weren't spared. If God saved you from the crash, why didn't he save the person in the next lane? Why do some people die instantly in accidents despite praying for protection? Saying, God saved me, is basically ignoring all the times God didn't save anyone else. It's survivor bias dressed up as divine favor. One particularly strange one is, it's a mystery we'll understand after we die. This is the ultimate procrastination excuse. It pushes all the hard questions into an afterlife no one can confirm exists. If you can't answer something now, you just move the answer to a realm where no one can check. It's like a politician promising that all the details will be released after the election, but the election never comes. The beauty of this excuse, for the person using it, is that you never get to call them out, because they'll say you have to wait until you're dead. Convenient, right? We also hear, prophecies prove religion is true. This sounds powerful until you look closer and see how vague, cherry-picked, or retrofitted most prophecies are. If a holy book says, there will be wars and famines, that's not prophecy. That's just describing what's always happened. And many fulfilled prophecies are written after the fact, like someone predicting an earthquake after it already happened and then claiming supernatural foresight. Nostradamus fans do this all the time. They find a vague line about a great fire and apply it to any disaster they want. Then we have, religion gives people hope, so it must be good. Hope can be valuable, sure, but that doesn't make the source of hope true. If someone believes a magic coin in their pocket protects them from illness, that belief might make them feel safe. But the coin doesn't actually have magical powers. Comfort doesn't equal truth. In fact, false hope can be dangerous because it can stop people from taking real, effective action. If you believe prayer will fix your problems, you might not take practical steps that actually could. Another one I've heard a lot is, religion has been around for thousands of years, so it must be true. This is like saying, people believe the earth was flat for thousands of years, so it must be true. Longevity doesn't prove correctness. It just proves that ideas, once embedded in culture, can stick around a long time, especially when they're taught from birth and questioning them is discouraged. There's also, I just feel God's presence. Feelings are powerful, but they're not proof of reality. People feel all kinds of things. Some feel their dead relatives visiting them in dreams. Others feel aliens are watching them. Our brains can create intense emotional experiences without any external cause. A powerful song, a moving movie scene, or standing at the edge of a breathtaking view can make you feel something so intense it feels bigger than yourself. But that doesn't mean it's proof of the supernatural. Feelings prove feelings, not facts. And who could forget? Look at all the good religion has done. This one conveniently skips over all the wars, persecutions, and atrocities done in the name of religion. Yes, religious people have built hospitals, started charities, and helped the poor. But so have non-religious people. Compassion is a human trait, not a religious monopoly. In fact, many religious charities only help if you also accept their beliefs, which isn't charity, it's conditional aid. Another classic is, without religion, life has no meaning. This assumes meaning can only be handed down from a divine source. But meaning is something humans create. You can find purpose in relationships, creativity, learning, and making the world better, none of which require belief in a God. In fact, realizing that this life is the only one you get can make it more precious, not less. One more that deserves attention is, God's timing is perfect. This is used whenever prayers seem to go unanswered. It's just not the right time. But the right time for what? If someone's starving, the right time to feed them is now. If someone's drowning, the right time to save them is now. If an all-powerful being exists, there's no reason to delay help. Saying, God's timing is perfect, is just another way of saying, nothing happened, but I still want to believe. We also hear, you can't take everything in Scripture literally. This is often said when a verse sounds absurd or morally outdated. But if you can't take it literally, who decides which parts are literal and which are metaphor? Usually, it's the person interpreting it to fit modern values, which means the truth of Scripture is constantly shifting to match human morals, not the other way around. If a divine book was truly perfect, it wouldn't need constant reinterpretation to keep up with society. Then there's, evil exists because of free will. This sounds reasonable at first, until you think about natural disasters, diseases, and genetic conditions. None of those come from human choice. If a hurricane destroys a town, that's not a result of free will. And even with human actions, if free will justifies evil, then why do believers pray for God to stop evil? If God wanted to preserve free will above all else, he wouldn't intervene at all. Yet believers constantly claim he does. Finally, one of the strangest excuses is, we can't understand it because we're only human. This is used like a universal shield. If something in religion makes no sense, you just blame it on human limitation. But this can be applied to literally anything. If I told you I had a magic invisible dragon that controls the weather, and you asked for proof, I could just say, well, we can't understand it because we're only human. It doesn't make it any more true. It just ends the conversation without addressing the problem. The pattern in all these excuses is the same. They're not designed to discover truth. They're designed to protect belief from scrutiny. They often sound comforting, wise, or humble on the surface, but underneath they're shortcuts to avoid admitting, I don't know, or there's no evidence. The tragedy is that once someone starts relying on these excuses, it becomes harder and harder for them to see the belief clearly. Every contradiction gets smoothed over with a pre-packaged phrase, every challenge dismissed with a well-rehearsed line. It's a self-reinforcing loop. The real breakthrough happens when someone realizes they don't need to defend every single claim their religion makes. It's okay to admit that something doesn't make sense, or that the evidence isn't there. In fact, that's the first step toward genuine understanding. Because the truth, whatever it is, doesn't need excuses. It stands up to questions, it invites examination, and it doesn't hide behind mystery or fear. And maybe that's why these excuses sound so hollow once you've heard them enough times. Deep down, most people know that just have faith isn't a real answer, that mysterious ways isn't an explanation, and that you can't prove it's not true isn't evidence for anything. They're placeholders, verbal filler to keep the structure of belief standing, even when the foundation is cracked. So the next time you hear one of these lines, think about what's really being said, not the words themselves, but the idea they're protecting. Because the moment you start peeling back the excuses, you can finally see the belief for what it is. Something that stands or falls on its own, without the safety net of well-worn phrases. And when that safety net is gone, all that's left is the truth, and the truth never needs an excuse.